Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm delighted to welcome you to our session on how to design internal mobility pathways. So, as we all know, career development is one of the strongest predictors of employee experience, but also at the same time one of the biggest gaps that some organizations are still trying to close. Today we're going to explore what internal mobility really looks like in practice, how it's evolved, how to build transparent and equitable pathways, and how leaders can create the conditions for people to grow where they are. So I'm joined today with two exceptional leaders who bring decades of experience and at very different organizations. So why don't we start quickly by Ray, first you, and then Edith, Sure. You introducing yourself. After that, we'll have about 20 minutes for our conversation with about 5 to 10 minutes for questions.
Great. Hello, everyone. Ray Chaaya, VP of Talent and Culture for Zurich, Canada. Fancy title to say that I oversee the employee experience, talent acquisition, talent development, talent management, the culture portfolio, so employee experience, DIEB, community partnerships. I think I got all of them. I usually miss one, and then somebody on my team says, what about me? And I say, yes, you. But I think those are it. Started out my career in the entertainment industry and then did a not-so-natural pivot into insurance about 20 years ago and never looked back. Excited to be here today to have the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Hello again. Edith Pencil. As you know, I work for Performance Otter Group. I head human resources, we call it employee services, for almost 2,300 employees across 39 dealerships, 5 body shops and a corporate shared services head office. We have centers of excellence and kind of span everything across talent acquisition to talent development, core HR. I have been with Performance Otter Group actually it'll be coming up 25 years this fall, and so I've been with Performance Otter Group for 25 years, but I haven't been in the same role for 25 years. I've had the experience of working in an array of different positions. Half of my experience at PAG was in the business, and the latter in HR. And so today's topic is really, I think, close to heart, but very much top of mind for me as an HR leader, the importance of career mobility, career development, internal mobility. As someone who has experienced that in the absence of an actual formal career development program, I think it's a great topic, and I'm happy to add to it. Looking forward to this conversation.
So Edith, why don't we just jump from there? So
yeah.
Mobility pathways have changed a lot, even in the last decade. So in the last almost 25 years that you've been at your organization, what's changed? And like, what's different now than it was before?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We're retail dealerships, and you think of automotive, we're not only OEM. There's so many different verticals of auto, and the experience I've had my entire career, professional adult life has been on the retail automotive side. And going back, a couple decades in retail auto, there were no career paths wasn't a term that was used in the workplace. But in the absence of a formal career development program, leaders were still engaging in discussions that tapped into employees' interests and identifying potential. And I was afforded opportunities, and that's the key word, opportunities. I think the retention was as a result of a multitude of opportunities, not necessarily just promotion, but lateral and different types of learning opportunities at the business. So when I think back of how our landscape, at least on the retail automotive side of things, has evolved, I think a lot of informal discussions and intentional maybe leadership decisions have led to, there are a number of us who've managed to move through different roles and experience great internal mobility. Today, I think there's a little bit more intentionality. We don't have, we're just in the very early stages of our actual career development program. elevate your career is what we call it. And but prior to actually implementing our career development program, we were, very intentional about highlighting internal movement in the organization, whether it was lateral or promotions. And I think when I look at it today, I think a lot of the storytelling that's happening, I think sometimes we underestimate the power of storytelling, the sharing of stories, whether it's through some of the ERP women's initiatives and different employee programs. Employees are able to really see all the highlights of employees that are moving in different areas of the business. So I think the key is the intentionality. I don't think we're, there yet in terms of having, many years of having a formal program in place, but we've been taking baby steps and, happy to engage in this conversation and learn more from my peers.
So Ray, how has it changed over the last 2 decades at Zurich?
Yeah, I mean, I'll second everything that Edith just said. I think, for us, we don't look at it so much as an internal mobility strategy that's separate from the employee experience. It's all part of the employee experience. What brings to life an internal mobility strategy is really your experience engine. We don't look, similarly to what you guys do, we don't look necessarily at growth and development as a series of promotions. In fact, storytelling, huge, because we have a really close partnerships with our communications folks, because we're very intentional about not speaking about growth and development as your next role, growing in a role. It's all about a portfolio of experiences. The more experiences you're able to get across the business, learn the business from different perspectives, different angles, that is really what gets your potential ready for that next step. And we've gone even as far as looking at our compensation models and tying our compensation models to experiences and skill sets that we have defined as necessary based on our strategy, our business strategy. So what we've done is we've translated essentially our business strategy into future capabilities. What capabilities do we need to be looking at in-house that bring that strategy to life? And then tied those specific capabilities to experiences across the business, build career paths around that. And then that's the story we talk about, because that's about employees moving around the business, and there's a story there to tell, and they can tell that story. And so that's typically what I've seen. When I compare back to 20 years ago, it was all very accidental.
Yes.
I moved around, I did a secondment, but it wasn't because somebody was thinking about strategy-wise, how am I going to move Ray around? It was, I'm pretty opinionated and pretty vocal. And so I was, kind of waving my hand saying, like, if you don't give me anything, I'm going to leave. And so they kind of had to listen back then. And so, I did some really cool secondments in Beijing during the 2008 Olympics. Those are things that really grow brand loyalty. It certainly did for me. When I was sent to Beijing and I was representing this brand, this global brand, it kind of did something to me. And then when I came back, I wanted to do more. I wanted to contribute more. And I remember this 20 years later. It's still what I talk about. And so that kind of taught me a lesson to how do I create those experiences for the people, but on a more systemic basis.
You both are making my job easy because you partially answered my next question, which was about the difference between, like, what do you do in terms of informal, like when there isn't a formal pathway? So let's sort of move on from there and say, what does transparent, equitable, internal mobility look like in practice? So even if it's not a formal program, how do you ensure there's equity when people are afforded opportunities or experiences?
You want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, I think posting roles internally, and I think having a talent acquisition, a standardized talent acquisition process. I think in retail auto in general, a lot of roles, that get filled. I think there's like succession planning that happens behind the scenes, and people already have like identified high potentials, or an emerging leader that they might want to fill into a role. But I think making sure that you have an internal application process through your talent acquisition team. And then I think it all comes down to leadership at the end of the day, and I've been hearing this often throughout the day in a lot of the topics. effective leadership really helps to drive employee retention. And one of the reasons we had engaged in developing a career development program is because of the employee listening we engaged to in responding to employee engagement feedback. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to leaders being comfortable having conversations with their employees about their career, and not being afraid of losing their talent, or as we are all very, very well accustomed to the term talent hoarding, avoiding that, because that's not just a thing of the past. I think it's something that a lot of organizations are trying to overcome. But again, it comes down to leadership. So that I feel like in order for there to be an equitable process for career mobility, it comes down to having leadership expectations on how to ensure that you are prioritizing those discussions with employees on their careers and what their aspirations are.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said leadership, because I think, when I talk about internal mobility strategy and people talk to me about an internal job board, that's not a strategy. That's just a job board, and you're putting jobs up there and you're hoping for a strategy.
Right.
I think an internal mobility strategy really has to be something that is championed by leadership and lived. And I think, career conversations. Anytime I'm talking to a manager and they're like, I have this person, they're high potential, I want to develop them, what should I do? And we start talking about, there's this career path or that career path. And then I have to pause for a second. I'm like, well, what do they want?
Right.
And they're like, that's a good question, I'm not sure. I'm like, how do you not know what they want? And why are we even having this conversation? And so I think, we have one-on-ones maybe on a regular cadence, but usually when you do have those one-on-ones, you're usually talking about the workload at hand, what needs to get done, the deliverables. Very rarely are you having that regular conversation with your people about development and where do they want to go with their career, what are their career aspirations. And so we're pretty intentional about holding our leadership accountable to knowing what their people's career aspirations are. They have to show up for succession planning ready to talk about their successors, about the career aspirations of their successors, why they're on their succession plan. So we really hold them accountable to that. Second of all, I think transparency and accessibility. I think, back to my previous point, it shouldn't be only available for people that are loud and waving their hands like I was. It really should also be available, opportunity and growth should be available for everyone, and that includes those that are maybe not comfortable putting up their hand or speaking up. So I think the storytelling, the talking about it, the promoting, the really putting it out there, and having the leaders champion it and live it and talk about it and really speak about the benefits of that and how we're moving more to the trends. All the trends show, especially as AI and everything moves in now, we're really talking about a workforce based on skill set. We're no longer talking about when I hear about an organization, they're like, well, we have 5 VPs and we have a CEO and SVPs and EVPs. That tells me what your org structure looks like. That doesn't tell me what your capabilities are, right? What I want to know is what can you do? And so when you start talking about what can you do, what can your workforce do, you start talking about capabilities. And so I think really tying those development opportunities, those growth opportunities, that movement to capabilities is key in order for people to understand why it's important.
Okay, so Ray, let's take off from that. So it's not just about, oh, I want to be developed or I want to develop you. How do you have those conversations about those skills, like that's those skills visibility, those skills mapping? What are the conversations? What are the actions that you can recommend to organizations, to our colleagues out there, especially if they're early in their journey, the organization is early in their journey?
Yeah, I think, skills mapping, dynamic resourcing, strategic workforce planning, these are really big words that typically will overwhelm people.
What does it mean in plain, right?
What does it mean in simple English?
Plain language.
It really means understanding the skills, the strengths, skill sets in your workforce and having a level of understanding where you know where and how you can move people within your workforce to help get the job done. This is a really, really big topic, and like I said, it can be quite overwhelming, but an easy way, if you have no skills, taxonomy, or any sort of strategic program or software that can help you with this stuff, I would say is start small. We started with one of our core units, the claims units. There's about 100 people in it at the time. And we just kind of started looking at the people there and looking at what does the job require these people to do? And what skill sets do we have? So we put out, surveys that asked people to kind of rate themselves, and their managers were rating them. And it gave us an idea of, in this unit, where are the strengths, where are the gaps, and what do we have to develop in-house? And we looked at those capabilities based on the strategic capabilities, based on the strategy. And so then it became really obvious, based on the strategy, this is what we need to do, and yet we don't have these gaps that we need to do these things with. So that's the gap. And then we thought, here are capabilities that we need to bring this to life, and there they are in that little corner of that claims unit. Around the same time when we were doing this exercise, we had a customer that was not too happy with us. We were about to lose the account because of the pace of claims. They were just not paying the claims on time, and we really needed to move people faster in that area. The natural thing to do there would have been to hire more people to get the job done, get them on contract, get more temp workers on. But because we were doing the exercise, we knew that we had people on this other side of the same unit that had very similar skill sets to what that unit needed to do. So we thought, let's just experiment. Let's move these people with zero training, but tell them, just keep doing what you know what to do, but do it differently. Here's some guidelines, but you should have enough knowledge to do the job anyway. And so we moved them there. Productivity increased by 80%.
80%.
80% in 2 weeks. They closed all the claims. And people looked at us like we were miracle workers. And then I thought, how the heck am I going to replicate this now? And I have not been able to yet. But I did it once and it worked. So I'm convinced that if we do it right, we could figure it out. Like I said, it's a much bigger conversation. But understand your people's aspirations. If you're not having conversations with your people, you're not going to understand what they're good at and what they don't like doing and what they like doing. And so make sure managers are having those conversations and start thinking about what does the strategy demand in terms of future capabilities. If you were to bring that strategy to life, what would that look like when you look at talent? What personalities do you need in that area of the business? What skill sets do you need? How do you need people to show up? That should translate into who we should be hiring, who should be moving up the succession plan, and how we should be developing those capabilities.
Edith, anything to add?
What he said.
Okay. So why don't we wrap up with our final sort of questions to you, Edith. So when when leaders are having those conversations with their people, how do they create an environment that builds trust? Because sometimes these types of conversations can cause anxiety, especially if you are not assertive and gregarious, maybe as Ray is, and you don't put your hand up, but you're like, pick me. So
right.
how do how do the leaders build that safety?
Again, it goes back to the leadership, and if leaders aren't having regular one-on-ones, this should not be a conversation that's happening in an annual review. One-on-one meetings and touch points should be happening regularly. And employees should not be, afraid to share what their aspirations are. Sometimes employees, I've heard employees, they're maybe afraid to, share that they have an aspiration that maybe is even outside of the department they're working in. And then, managers sometimes their default is, why do you want to leave? Or why do you want that? I feel like they should be responded more with so how can we get you there? What's your 5-year plan? One of the questions I love to ask in one-on-ones, and or quarterly development meetings is like, what's that 5-year plan that you've been talking about? What are we doing to get there? So I think until those conversations, when you're cultivating a relationship with your employees that's built on trust and transparency, and your employees know that you're there to support them in their development, whether it's their goal is, within your department or outside your department or a competing department within the organization. Until leaders have that mindset that their responsibility as a leader is to help cultivate and develop people and not necessarily just focus on, the objectives and targets and, the goals of the business. I think, until we get to that point, those types of safe environment, it will create more of a safe environment for employees to be comfortable sharing what those aspirations are. And I think that's really what the gist of it. It really goes back to that leadership effectiveness.
And I think recognize leaders that develop people for the enterprise,
100%.
not just for their team.
Love that. Yeah.
I think that is so important. It's something that barely anyone does.
Right.
Because we're so focused on our team and developing our people and how is this person under me going to grow. But yet, really what we want people to do is think outside of their lane, think bigger. Look at the enterprise. We talk about enterprise-wide mindset. And I think as a leader, I have a responsibility not just to look at my team, but also to look outside of my team and see, hey, that person over there, they have aspirations to do something in talent and culture. That's my responsibility to see, can I make room for them? Is there something I can give them? And I think recognizing those leaders will make a change.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you both. We've got a few minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions. And so since I won't be able to see your hands, Ray will call on people.
Got a few over there, yeah.
Go for it. You get to pick.
It's picked. Yeah.
Hi, Delaney again. What have you done in both of your organizations to ensure that leaders stay away from their own biases, that the loudest person in the room are the best leaders?
At least from our organization, in full transparency, as I mentioned earlier, there is talent hoarding that's still happening, right? But I think when it comes to changing that, our senior leaders are engaging more with all of the operational leadership roles to ensure that they're looking at all the people within the team and not necessarily maybe just that top performer on the team, right? So I think, again, we have leaders at different levels, and it has to obviously come from top down. Talent hoarding and transparency is something where, I think the industry in general is trying to overcome. But again, it will require intentional setting expectations with the leaders on ensuring that they are not necessarily just honing in on 1 or 2 people within their team, but they're making sure that they're consistent leadership practices are evolving, and they're assessing all of their employees within their team to determine what those capabilities are and what those aspirations are. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm not sure if you have anything to add on that, Ray.
Yeah, I think it's a system. So I oversee DIEB as well. And my expectation is not that my DIEB team is just doing, DIEB events with their ERGs. My expectation is that they're at the table having conversation with my talent management team to make sure that they are taking a look at the succession plans of the leader and holding the leaders accountable. Good. And so my talent management team will show up with my diversity and inclusion team at the succession plan meetings, and they will challenge leaders and say, how come I don't see any females on your development plan? How come you have this high-performing female that is not moving up the succession plan, and she's been there for 4 years. So they will push and they will challenge, and that is 100% my expectation. None of them, silos is the biggest disruptor of the talent system, and so many of us live in these silos, and I hate it, and that's not a strong word. It's not strong enough for me to even say, but I just hate it because if the system worked, we would be so much more efficient. And so my expectation is every single aspect of that talent system is working together, and their objectives, I hold them accountable. They all have very interlinked objectives. they're not just held accountable to do their job, they're also held accountable to help the other person, their colleague, do their job as well.
Thank you both for your insights. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for any questions, but maybe if you can catch Edith and Ray maybe on the side, we can continue the conversation. I want to thank you both for your insights. What we've certainly learned is that internal mobility pathways is not a program, it's a mindset, and organizations that are successful in doing this are organizations that have leaders that set the stage and have those conversations with their employees.
Awesome.
I want
Thanks,
to thank you
everyone.
both. Thank you, everyone.